Imagine it's Monday morning. You wake up, no alarm, no email, no Slack notification, nobody wondering why you're not online. You look outside, it's raining, so you go back to sleep. Sounds pretty good. Now here's the strange part. A medieval peasant might actually have had more days without scheduled work than you do. Some historical estimates put certain medieval agricultural workers at surprisingly low numbers of days of obligatory labor. And that's where the internet gets very excited, because suddenly the medieval peasant becomes a productivity guru. Look at them. They worked less than us. Except that's not really what happened, because the strangest difference between their working life and yours isn't the number of days. It's the thing controlling those days. You work by the clock. They often worked by the task. Imagine it's June. The hay is ready. Your medieval alarm clock is a rooster. Your boss is the weather. And today the weather is telling you that rain is coming. So you grab your tools and you work. Not because it's 9 o'clock. Not because you've got 8 hours left. You work because the hay isn't finished. You cut it, gather it, dry it, get it under cover. And if that takes until sunset, you keep going because the task is still there. Now compare that with your workday. You can finish everything you needed to do at 4:17 and still sit there until 5 because your workday isn't necessarily organized around finishing the task. It's organized around time. You have working hours, billable hours, overtime, lunch breaks, meetings at 10:30, another meeting at 11. Your entire day has been divided into pieces by a clock. And that's the weird part. We don't just work anymore. We sell hours. Now, this doesn't mean medieval peasants worked 8 hours every day from sunrise to sunset. Their working year was much stranger than that. Agricultural work came in bursts: planting, harvesting, threshing, plowing. There could be periods of intense work when everything had to be done immediately. And then there could be periods when there was simply less urgent work in the fields. The calendar also had Sundays and numerous religious feast days when ordinary labor could be restricted. So yes, there could be a surprising amount of time when a medieval worker wasn't doing agricultural labor for a lord. But here's the catch. What exactly counts as work? This is where the famous 150 days statistic becomes dangerous. If your lord tells you to work 3 days on his land, and you work those 3 days, that's recorded as labor for your lord. But what happens on the other days? You don't sit around doing nothing. You work your own land. You tend animals, repair the roof, gather firewood, prepare food, spin thread, mend clothes, maintain tools, look after children. And much of that work happened inside the household, including work performed by women and children. So when somebody says medieval peasants only worked 150 days a year, the obvious question is, worked at what? For whom? And doing what? That's why comparing their working days directly with your office days is so difficult. They're measuring different things, but the clock comparison is still fascinating. Historian E.P. Thompson described pre-industrial labor as largely task-oriented rather than governed by precise clock time. And you can feel the difference immediately. Imagine saying, "I'll work until the hay is in." That's completely different from, "I'll work until 5. One is controlled by the task, the other is controlled by the clock. And industrialization made that distinction much more important. Factories needed synchronized workers, clocks became more precise, work became something that could be measured in hours and minutes, and eventually time itself became something you could buy, sell, save, and waste. You don't just have time anymore, you have not enough time. You need to save time. You wasted an hour. You're behind. You need to make up the time. And eventually we turn the whole thing into a slogan. Time is money. But before you start fantasizing about quitting your job and becoming a medieval peasant, don't. Seriously, you have antibiotics. He has prayer. You have central heating. He has a fire. You have a supermarket. He has to grow, preserve, or make much of what his household needs. And when the harvest fails, that's not a bad quarter. It's a catastrophe. So the point isn't that medieval people secretly had a better work-life balance. They didn't. Their lives could involve exhausting physical labor, hunger, disease, and obligations to people above them. The point is something stranger. They weren't necessarily working less. They were living inside a completely different definition of work. And that's why the question, did medieval peasants work less than us, doesn't have a simple yes or no answer. Sometimes, depending on the worker, period, region, and what you're counting, they may genuinely have had fewer days of obligatory labor. But their household work doesn't disappear just because nobody put it on a timesheet. Their year could swing between brutal periods of agricultural work and periods of relative slack. Their calendar was shaped by seasons, weather, religion, and necessity. And their work could be organized around completing a task rather than filling a fixed number of hours. So perhaps the most interesting comparison isn't who worked more. It's this: who owned their time? A medieval peasant could spend an exhausting day working until the hay was finished. You can spend an exhausting day staring at a clock waiting for 5 o'clock. And maybe that's the strangest thing we've lost. Not leisure, not an easier life, just a world where the clock wasn't constantly telling you that you were late.